I think it's safe to say, and this doesn't feel super controversial, that the UK tax system is broken. If you look at the tax burden hasn't been this high for decades, and yet you look around, all around you and public services are completely falling apart. And you might be thinking, well, where's all the money going? But the truth is, when you actually look at the tax burden compared to other international comparisons, like OECD countries, for example, actually the tax burden in the UK isn't that high. So in this video, we're going to be going through how they can make the tax system fairer and more equitable. Great Odin's Raven. Okay, I think one of the things that you will eventually find, it's not necessarily the amounts, but it's how taxes are paid in the UK. So, and the current tax system is 21,000 pages. Like, that's some real .gov shit there. So just quickly, what makes a good tax system? A tax system should be progressive, it should be effective, and it should be neutral. A progressive tax system means that as people are earning more, they are paying more in taxes, which means it should look like this. Unfortunately, the UK effective tax rates look like this. Yeah, I mean, more cliffs going on there than Dover, frankly, to be honest. So what drives a lot of this? Well, you'll see here that there are all these fiscal cliffs, and that's because as you move up the income tax brackets, you lose access to certain tax benefits, you know, what few there are, frankly. The next is neutral. It shouldn't necessarily distort people's behaviour. Now, this means, for example, people should want to work, or people should work because of their willingness, their ability, or whatever. But actually, for tax reasons, it may not necessarily make sense for people to work. So a neutral tax system shouldn't necessarily alter people's behaviour or people's habits. And the next is effective. Now, a tax system should ultimately facilitate and accommodate a booming and growing economy. Now, there's a lot of discussion about the Laffer curve, which basically shows that there is a optimum tax rate that should be charged to people. Too low and you don't bring in sufficient revenues in order to provide public services to people. Too high and the opportunity cost to people is just going to be so great that they will do everything they can to reduce paying those taxes or potentially even moving away. Now, I think it's safe to say that the Laffer curve has come under some degree of criticism, and I think ultimately what you find is that because we are not just talking about a single tax, we are talking about a whole series of taxes, a whole series of tax benefits. It's an immensely complicated and convoluted machine, and to some degree that's by design, but also a lot of it is just layers and layers and layers of legislation that's been passed over decades, and they don't just add a new bit of legislation and take the other bit away. It's bum, and so it has stacked up. So what are some of the key things that really makes the tax system inequitable? We talked about this in some detail in another video, but just quickly, what you find is the fiscal cliffs that we've mentioned. You also find that there's a cap on quite a few taxes. A good example is council tax. Council tax is capped at £320,000 based on a house price in 1991. Okay, all right. So if you live in a £100 million mansion on Kensington Palace Gardens, you pay the same council tax as someone in a 320 grand house. Like, that is insane. So caps will generally favour people who have more money or people who have more wealth. Second reason is taxes will generally focus on income rather than wealth. So people who have a lot of assets already that are generating income can use that income to buy more assets, and they aren't necessarily taxed at that point. They will only get taxed at the point at which they sell those assets. So again, that's another part of the problem. You look at social care. The social care cap is about £86,000, as we talked about in the previous video. If you have £84,000, then it's of no benefit to you. If you've got many millions, then great, the social cap does you loads of benefits. And just some of it is like proper pickled brain shit. But okay, so now we get to the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be discussing in the video, and that is how can we make the tax system fairer? And some of this is just so simple and so easy that it's almost more frustrating. But anyway, the first thing is for benefits to taper more gradually. So as we talked about, so let's look at the fiscal cliff. If you make £99,000, you'll get access to between 15 and 30 hours of free childcare for under 4-year-olds, or for 9 months to 4-year-olds it will be soon, which can be worth up to about 10 grand. And you will also get another £2,000 of childcare. But if you make £101,000, you'll lose access to both of those. So you make 2 grand a year more, which you'll get taxed on, but you also lose access to about £10,000 in benefits. So, you know, that doesn't make any sense. So I think there should be generally fewer fiscal cliffs. That means tapering these things off much more gradually so that it actually pays to work. That's one thing successive governments are always talking about, that we want it to pay to work. We want it to make sense to work. And, you know, if you're going to get fewer benefits that you have to take out of your net pay, then that doesn't necessarily encourage people to work. The second thing, and I think this is a really important one, and there's been a decent amount of research on this one, is to have fewer benefits but make them more generous. So why, for example, do you have two different kinds of benefit for childcare, for one for under 11s and one for 8 months to 4-year-olds? Why would you not just have a more generous single benefit? Because the problem is, what you invariably find is that each of these benefits have got different criteria, different thresholds, and it just makes it much more onerous, and it just turns it into a minefield for people to be able to navigate to make sure that they are getting the best use out of their tax dollars, or their tax pounds I should say. Crikey. This has two benefits. It's basically easier for the government to administer, it's easier for citizens to be able to understand it, and I think, it's easier to live with. The third thing is just make this stuff universal. Just say, you know what, there was a thing that I saw in the news a long time ago that said when the government cracked down on some of the disability benefits, I think it was the PIP assessments, they found that it saved the government about £72 million by being more strict on people. Now, you could make all sorts of arguments, which we won't go into, that's not the purpose of this video, but what they had also found is that they'd spent about £72 million having increased enforcement. So, yeah, they'd saved some money, but they'd also had to spend basically about the same amount. So, actually just making some of this stuff universal, I think, is way easier. Why don't you just say, anyone who's got a kid under the age of 18 gets this? Like, great, fine. Easy, just super easy. And this is one of the key kind of discussion, and I don't want to go too much into this, but this is really one of the key selling points for advocates of universal basic income. This idea that you strip away most other benefits and you just get, when Andrew Yang, presidential candidate from 2016, advocated for this, he was talking about I think it was $1,000 a month or $1,500 a month. So you don't have all of these benefits, all of these different caps or whatever, you just have that. And, you look at the cost involved in managing kind of some of the social services that we have, and it starts to make a compelling point. This is not a political channel, it's just a discussion topic for what we're discussing here. Don't cap taxes, seems kind of obvious, we've discussed it in detail. Caps will generally benefit people who have more money because they are caps, so obviously. And then the last one is to treat wealth and income the same, so that means taxing labour and taxing capital the same. If someone makes £20,000 a year, doesn't matter if they did it because they're a plumber or they're an accountant, or it doesn't matter if they've got a vast stocks and shares portfolio, just treat it as being the same. So in this video we've been discussing some of the policy options available to the government, this one, next one, whichever one, whoever one, whatever, about how they can make the tax system fairer and more equitable. Thanks very much for watching. Peace.